Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Aftershow. I am your host, Nikki Novak, and today we are going to be deep diving into, could you guess it, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. We're going to be talking about everything to do with the film, the critics score, the audience score, the box office, where they go from here. And I should warn you that this is a spoiler-filled episode, so if you haven't watched Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny and you don't want it spoiled, then stop right here, go watch the film, and then come back. I'm cracking that whip. I'm making sure that we don't spoil it for you. But today, I'm very, very excited to be joined by Joe Aragon. He is the host of the House of Cinema podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about Indiana Jones. I like the whip joke. It was very smart. I hope everybody caught that.
We're filming this on a Monday before the 4th of July, so I feel like I'm a little, I appreciate that I even got anything in there. But just your first time joining this actual show, so welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited. I was on the Rotten Tomatoes is Wrong show, so you may have recognized my voice there or my face. But I'm excited to talk about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. A lot of thoughts.
Can we talk about your face for a second
before
we start?
What's my face?
Reminds me of Kieran Culkin from Succession, which I told you before we started rolling.
This is true.
But you do get this?
Once in a while, yeah. We had this conversation. At first thing, Nikki goes, "Who do people say you look like?" And I was like, I don't know.
You just did a Roman right there.
But yeah, Kieran Culkin. I do get Kieran Culkin sometimes. Once in a while, like I said, Adrian Brody, because we have the same nose. But Kieran, I'll take it.
I love him so much.
Yeah,
so it is the
highest
praise.
I'll take it.
Should we talk about Succession for the next hour instead?
Maybe. People might like that a little bit more. We'll see.
Let's dive into the film. So first of all, let's talk about the Tomato Meter score. This premiered at Cannes quite a while ago, it feels like now. It's such a long summer with so many blockbusters it feels like 6 months ago to me now. But the Tomato Meter score is fresh at 68%. The audience score, a delightful 88%. And the box office opening weekend, not so amazing. $60 million opening weekend. We will talk about this a little bit later, but let's give you a little bit of an idea of the critics' consensus. It's not as thrilling as earlier adventures, but the nostalgic rush of seeing Harrison Ford back in action helps Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny find a final few bits of cinematic treasure. So I'm going to throw this over to you, Joe, and what are your initial thoughts on critics score, audience score? Who are you most in alignment with? We haven't talked anything. We totally haven't. I have no idea how you feel about this.
I know.
Film.
I was so eager to say things before the podcast, but I wanted to save it for the episode. I feel like this is pretty representative of how I feel, at least on the critics side of things. Now, 68% it's a lot higher than what initially this came out at. You mentioned it came out of Cannes. Was frightfully low. People were a little nervous about it. I mean, we'll probably get into that a little later too.
Yeah.
But the overall consensus on the critic side, I think, is representative of how I feel. The audience is a little bit more positive, a little bit, they like it a little bit more, which I think makes sense considering we're dealing with this very nostalgic character in Indiana Jones. But I feel overall the same as this score. How do you feel?
I am a huge Indiana Jones fan. I really am jonesing to know the original trilogy, your order, because I think there's only one correct answer.
Oh, wow. All right. Well, hopefully I get it right.
But I feel like I've been sitting with this movie for a while. I was lucky enough to interview Harrison and Phoebe back in January.
Wow.
For our big ticket show. And so I feel like I have dove into this so long ago that when I finally saw it, I had so much expectation.
Yeah.
And then, when you were interviewing people, you go back and I watched it all in succession, and I really enjoyed the movie overall. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I don't know what happened with the initial response at Cannes because it was lower than the current score, and it actually came up once people in America and other people started to see it closer to the opening. I think it's a good film.
Yeah.
Mangold is a great director. All of the elements work. I love Harrison Ford. I loved Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I thought she was absolutely delightful. I thought there were so many things that did work. Mm-hmm. And I think the problem is right now, in terms of taking an action adventure movie, and it's in the summertime when you have Mission Impossible opening in 2 weeks and you have like so many other big action movies, I feel like unconsciously or consciously people compare, right? And so you have like, when I think about it, like a movie like Mission Impossible coming out where Tom Cruise is performing all his own stunts and he's 60 versus Harrison Ford who's 80 and performing some stunts, but it's not the same.
No.
I think it's harder to maybe please the audience. And something that I found that I think maybe people are having a hard time with, it's very hard to, you're also thinking of like our modern day and age of movie sensibilities, and we're so used to superhero movies and Marvel movies being these big blockbusters. And you have a film like this that feels more like classic filmmaking and almost like a throwback, and it's set in the 60s. It's not set in current day. And so I think it's a tougher sell. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that, strangely enough, I think the problem maybe most people are having, or maybe critics are having right now, is that it does feel like it's, a flashback to the 60s and the 80s type of action adventure movie. But it also seems like it's trying to balance being a modern blockbuster, trying to fit in with the Marvel movies, the DC movies, these big superhero movies, when it's never had to really be that kind of movie, but it's trying to do those two things at once, trying to be a Marvel movie, but also trying to be a Raiders of the Lost Ark or Last Crusade.
Okay, so tell me how you think it is trying to be a Marvel movie, because I actually don't think it is.
Oh, so I would say it's trying to be a Marvel movie because of its big action set pieces that are, in my opinion, maybe a little bit too long. So we're dealing with like this big rickshaw car chase, which is almost, and this might be a kind of a stretch, but I almost feels Fast and Furious-esque, where it lasts a really long time, and it's a little ridiculous, you could say. I mean, you have 80-year-old Harrison Ford jumping from rickshaw to rickshaw, and all these big moments where it's like, oh, someone's hanging from the hood of a car. Not that Indiana Jones has always been void of adventure or action sequences, but never to this magnitude. And it does feel like sometimes this movie is trying to say, oh, look at us. We're all so cool, like these big movies, like Fast and Furious, like the Marvel movies. Look at this big chase scene. Look at Harrison Ford ride a horse in the middle of the street with all these parades going on and cars going by. So at times it feels like it's trying to be this big blockbuster, but also like, hey, also let's get some puzzle solving moments like in Raiders or Last Crusade. So I think it's trying to balance these two sides of this one coin, and that's where it's getting stuck in this middle for some people.
Interesting. Because it actually, now that you say that, I can see what you're saying. Because when I think of like rickshaw and I think of the big action set pieces like the train sequence, I'm like, this is classic indie. But you're right. They are stretched out. And that's generally, not even with this movie, but my issue with, I feel like so many movies now is they're all 20 minutes too long.
This was a long movie. It's like 2.5 hours or more.
Yeah. And I felt like Guardians 3, as much as I love that, was too long. But I'm more in line with the audience, and I'm very precious over my nostalgia films, and because I do feel like we judge films now. I feel like we're so, as audiences, as critics, we're so hard on every movie. Do you remember like when these movies came out, like when the original trilogy came out in the 80s, early 90s, you basically went to the theater, and sometimes you didn't even know what you were going to go see. You would go to the theater and you'd be like, should we see this or this or this? And you were thrilled with what you saw. And now we're so spoiled for choice with streaming and films. And I feel like everybody's a critic online. And so I feel like we're so much harder on these films than we would have been in the 80s. That's why it's harder to compare these two, because I thought it was a great movie overall. I felt like it was too long, and that's where it lost me. But overall, I thought they did a great job. So do you feel like this was like, when you think about, because we are going to spoiler territory, like the ending of where this ended up, is this a justified ending for his character? Because this is, I guess, it for at least for Harrison Ford.
Yeah. So we're not talking about the plot twist ending, but maybe like we're talking about the last 10 minutes.
Yeah,
maybe.
I guess overall his arc in this film. I mean, he's a little bit more downtrodden than he has been in past films. I mean, understandably so. But also, some people are arguing that he didn't need to be, like at the beginning where he was at the end of his career and he was sort of like his students didn't appreciate him. Some people felt like they didn't need to start in that place. He could have been a little bit more of a hero in this. In that day and age.
I think the ending works really well, if I'm being completely honest. It's actually one of my favorite parts about this movie is that I think what I love about this movie is that it's less of a story about this big adventure. I mean, obviously it's a big adventure, but also it's a story about a man grappling with his past and really being stuck in the past, wanting to live in the past because his present life isn't what he wants it to be. He's divorced. His son has passed away, which is an interesting way to kind of canonically move on from Mutt Williams. But I think it's about a guy trying to reckon with his past, and I love that the ending. He wants to stay in the past. He literally tells, Helena, leave me here in this ancient time of Sicily. And she's like, no, you need to come back. And she punches him and he comes back.
It was a great moment, by the way.
Great moment.
Yeah.
And I think what makes that especially great is that it feels like it's a parallel to modern audiences. It's almost like Mangold is telling audiences like, you're kind of stuck in the past as well. Too many people are stuck in the past watching Indiana Jones. And we want to live in nostalgia. We want to live with Raiders and Last Crusade and Temple of Doom. But we need to kind of wake up ourselves and move to the present. And I think that's like a nice little parallel between the movie and modern audiences. And I like that she punches him and he's like has to like realize I can't live in the past anymore. So I love the ending to this movie. I think it is a really nice send-off for Indiana Jones overall because he does learn to move on and live his life as it currently is. So I like the ending. How do you feel?
I loved that moment. That moment really worked. And I truly thought in that moment he was going to stay in the past. And I thought that's because we had also, which we're going to get into in a second, a lot of the rumors that were circulating about what was happening in this film, which apparently now I'm learning there were never test audiences to even leak anything. So I don't know how these things got started, but I had heard about time travel, and I was like, oh, this is how it's going to end, is Indiana Jones is going to be left, and that's how we conclude his story. I had no idea she was going to pop him in the face.
Oh, yeah.
And that was such a, it was a laugh out loud moment in my screening. I know you went to the premiere. I was at a screening, and it was just one of those great, oh my gosh, I didn't expect that. Thank you for doing that because we don't need him. But I was thinking, the one thing that I think would have been fun would be I love the humor and the optimism and the quirky jokes and the one-liners of earlier Indiana Jones. And I was like, wouldn't it have been funny if she was like, okay, you stay, you do your thing. And then he goes running and then he has somebody running after him with a spear or something. And he's like, no, I'm out. He made the choice.
Yeah.
He decided rather than the other way around. But I didn't have a problem with the way that moment played out. I think it's just things that we do as we create. Oh, well, that would have been cool.
Yeah.
Or wouldn't it be cool? Short Round was in the movie. Or
yeah, I think a lot of people were wondering if people from his past. I mean, clearly some people from his past do show up, but I think a lot of people may have expected the nostalgia factor to be heightened. And I'm actually glad it wasn't. I think it's easy to kind of rely on past characters or moments to get a positive reaction from the audience. Fan service is a big thing, and I'm glad they didn't lean too much into that. The little bit we got, I think, was perfect. We get the moment with what part hurts me, and they point. And I thought that was a perfect kind of callback to Raiders. That isn't too on the nose, but still a really nice way to kind of mend their relationship. But I think I love the ending. I think it's a really nice way to say it's time to move on for Indy as well. And I think, like you mentioned, it would have been Harrison or Indiana Jones making that decision himself. I think the movie is about the fact that he's been doing things by himself the whole time, and he needs to realize it's okay to get help from people, whether that be Helena, whether that be Marion, whether that be whoever he's with. So I like that she made the decision to pop him in the face and tell him, no, you need to come back home.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm critical because it's actually one of my favorite moments in the film. I think it's just sometimes we go, oh, that would have been cool.
Yeah,
and it would have been better or worse. Yeah. It's just an idea I had. So there was a lot of rumors, like I mentioned, about what was going to happen in this film. And some people thought that Phoebe Waller-Bridge was going to become Harrison Ford's replacement and wear the hat. Little did people know it's actually me, and I took the hat. I'm going to be in the next...
deleted scene. Don't tell them.
But how did you feel about her character and the way that relationship played out in the film?
I love her character. I mean, Phoebe Waller-Bridge can't do any wrong in my book. She can do anything, and I probably will like it. But I really liked her character, and I think Helena is an interesting... I wouldn't call her a foil to Indiana Jones. I think she's just kind of a mirror to what he was when he was younger. She's very much like him. But I love her, and I love her dynamic with Indy. I love that she's also somebody who's trying to deal with her own past, with her father. I really liked her role in this movie. I was a big fan of it. Now, the future of Indiana Jones, whether that include her or not. I don't know. I think that would have been an interesting choice. I don't think I would have been opposed to it at all. How do you feel?
I think maybe. I don't think that was ever the case. Like, I don't think it was ever written that way. James Mangold was like, I don't know where you're all getting this from because that was never the way it was intended to be. I'm curious where they'll go with it, but I do know that when I watched the film, I always take notes, and next to her name I wrote star because I thought it was a star performance.
Yeah,
I thought she was incredibly charismatic, and I just felt like there was like a relaxed quality to the way she delivered her lines that I don't know if I could have been that relaxed acting opposite him, and maybe I was projecting, and she is an actress and this is what she does. But sometimes I feel like when somebody comes into a franchise and it's one movie, you have one movie to sort of have a whole character arc and, become loved by audiences versus characters that we are nostalgic with. It's an uphill battle. And I thought she was perfection opposite him. She held her own. The one issue that I had was she started out, and I loved the bit in the beginning when they were in the university, and she takes off on him and locks him in, and she's just like, sorry. I was like, oh my gosh, I wasn't expecting that, where she's just full on a thief. But then it switches over to where they're allies. And I wasn't really sure when it switched over and at what point. Do you know what I mean? Like, the relationship definitely evolved.
Yeah.
But I feel like there was like one scene that was maybe deleted or something that sort of informed me.
It does jump pretty quickly, right? They start off as almost competitors. She's a thief. He's trying to save the artifacts for the college, and she's trying to sell it for money. I mean, there's really no reason besides that she just wants to get rich off it, or that she wants to find what happened to her dad. And I guess it kind of becomes a companionship when they realize that she needs to find this artifact that will, kind of figure out something happened with her dad, and then he wants to help out with her. It does feel like there's a little bit like a missing piece between these two moments and where they decided to become allies in this relationship. So
like it would have been fun to see the whole movie she's a thief.
Yeah.
And then something organically happens where she gets pulled by Indy, or the opposite. Like, it was always about her dad. It was always about, fulfilling his legacy and reconciling that relationship. But I feel like it was one, and then it was the other, and then it was both. And it was more the character arc, had nothing to do with her performance. But I thought as an actress overall, she was great.
I agree.
Another thing that people talked about was the fact that Indy did, and we touched on this a little bit, Indy was a little bit more downtrodden in the beginning. But I was thinking to myself, like, can you imagine if Mangold had written it where Indy was like this hero at school and everything was great? Like, where do you go from there if he almost, and I do feel like Indiana or like Harrison wouldn't have wanted to come back if it didn't have, he talks over and over in interviews about character and story, and there has to be a reason for this story to exist.
Yeah.
So where would they have gone if he was still great, if everything was still great in his life?
I don't know. And I'm glad they don't make him, or they start off the movie as like he's this big hero that everybody loves. I mean, I don't know what the movie's purpose is at that point. I mean, he's Indiana Jones. We already love him. Like, there's no reason to make another movie where he's just the big action hero star again. I mean, I like that we start off with Indiana Jones is retiring. He's moving on. He's ready to just live his life out as a divorcee, an unhappy divorcee, but a divorcee. I like that. I think that it makes sense to have him pulled into this new adventure is because of someone like Helena. I don't think it would make sense to kind of have him start all over again, because the big question is why? Why would he want to get involved in another venture at his point in that life?
And there's nothing wrong with being 80, but if he was like, hey, I'm ready for another one, and didn't reluctantly get pulled in, you'd be like, dude, like, chill out. Like, maybe it's time to retire. But because we got the opposite, people are like, well, did he have to be that way?
Yeah.
But I
mean, there's even a scene that he has with his friend. I always miss his name. But the friend from Last Crusade, or I believe, and
Salah?
Yeah. So he has that moment where he's like, oh, I want to go with you. I want to go on this adventure. And he's like, no, you don't. It's like, I have to go because of X, Y reason.
Yeah.
But like, you don't. It's like, we had that time in our life, but now it's time for us to just move on. And I think that's like kind of that, maybe that response to the audience where it's like, well, why isn't Indy the big action star? It's like, well, because he doesn't need to be anymore. So maybe that's what we're supposed to take from it.
Yeah. The one issue I did have with Indy was throwing the clock. Was it the gift that he got from his students?
Oh, yeah. He gave it to the homeless guy.
I was like, dude.
Well, he probably has a lot of clocks at home. I don't know.
Dude, that was mean.
Well, I'll get you a clock for Christmas, and then you can have it.
I didn't understand as a character choice, like why he was doing that. It was almost like he didn't revere anything anymore. Like instead of, I don't know.
I think they're really trying to hit home that he's like this, I wouldn't say miserable, but definitely an unhappy person in his life.
Yeah.
He gets home, he looks at the divorce papers, puts the magnet on Marian's face. Like he's clearly not at a place in his life where he's totally happy.
Moment.
Yeah, puts the magnet on her face. And then at the very end, he moves the magnet because she's there. And he's like, I don't want her to see that.
The thing I did appreciate was him being pissed at the college students for making too much
too.
noise because
Yeah.
I can't stand when people are noisy around me, my neighbors. So I was like, you go, Indy.
Although it was Moon Day. I mean, I got to be a little bit excited that it's Moon Day. People are landing on the moon. I don't know if I'd be pretty excited. But
Well, speaking of Moon Day, let's talk about sort of the big action set pieces.
Okay.
There was the opening sequence on the train, the parade, obviously. You have the tuk-tuk stuff in Morocco, and then the time travel stuff. Do you have a favorite set piece? And what did you feel about the de-aging in the...
Wow, so lots to tackle here.
Yeah,
I do
big
questions, a lot of tackle. I you know what scene you didn't mention? I do like the scene where they go underwater as well to the ship.
Yes, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Antonio Banderas.
Antonio Banderas, great in this role.
Yeah.
Not enough of him in my opinion, but great
True.
in the role. I do like that scene. I think it's fun to kind of go in there and use eels as the place for snakes. I thought that was a kind of a clever way to incorporate that. I do like the final scene. So the time travel scene, I'm all on board. I'll be completely honest. On board with time travel.
So thrilled you said that. I loved it too.
Well, I know we're going to get to is it too ridiculous later, but I
Yeah.
will just say now I'm a big fan of it, and I have my defense later. But so I like that a lot. I think the beginning action set piece on the train, like the tuk-tuk scene, is a little bit too long, and especially why the train scene doesn't work for me is because we spend way too much time with a de-aged Harrison Ford, which I think overall doesn't look bad. I think it looks good, but we spend so much time with it, it does become a little bit uncanny after some points. And it just lasts a little bit too long. There's some times where I just was like watching it and it, again, felt like a Fast and Furious movie. I mean, there's a moment where Mads Mikkelsen's character gets slammed in the face by this like pole. And my whole audience just reacted viscerally, like, "Oh my gosh,
That's
hit
it.
so hard. That's it. He's done. He's dead." But he's not dead. He comes back later. And I think some people are just like, "It's a lot going on." And I'm not sure. It gets a little dark at the end, and it kind of feels like it's dark intentionally because it's trying to hide us, from the CGI de-aging face. So I'm not a big fan of the action or the train scene, but I do like the underwater scene a lot. I think it's a lot of fun, and the time travel. Big fan of that. I love that the planes are just there flying above these, these Roman armies or Sicilian armies, whatever armies they are. I think that was a lot of fun. I'm a big fan of that. So.
And yeah, the way it was executed was great.
Yeah. Oh, there's a moment where the plane is flying into like the eye of the storm, and it kind of does this wide shot, and it
That's
looks
exactly what I was thinking.
so
of.
cool to see it. It's like, oh, are they gonna do it? I remember watching this movie and thinking, are they gonna do it? Are they gonna time travel right now? And they do it, and I was bundle of joy when that happened. So.
Well, and I don't think has time travel been done in that way before, where it's actually a plane flying into this. It was original. It wasn't this magical kind of like snap your fingers thing.
Yeah, well, we're in a world now where time travel is like in every movie every month at some point, right?
Yeah.
I think in June alone there was 2 movies about time travel. 3, to be honest. I mean, we got The Flash's time travel, Spider-Man's time travel multiverse. Now we're doing Indiana Jones time travel. So time travel is a hot thing right now. And so you can do it in a million different ways. And I think this one was a lot of fun to think
I mean, Back to the Future is one of my favorite movies of all time. So time travel is a thing that I do love. So
Yeah.
I was your target audience for this whole thing. When you said The Flash, it reminded me of like fan service.
Yeah, well, The Flash is done in a different way. Not sure
That
if it's a
was
good way.
way too much
but
fan service
That
for me
one's a little bit
personally.
different. Yeah.
When you were talking about Ki Week One. But yeah, so I actually, so many people said that I heard said they had a problem with Harrison's voice during the de-aging part because he sounded
Yes.
older. I didn't notice it. I was so
really?
mesmerized. I didn't give 2 craps. I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
Because I do love me some Harrison Ford from back in the day, and it was giving me the vibes.
Yeah.
And I absolutely loved it. And I thought it was a great way to it was so smart. Like,
Yeah.
it was just so smart to put this element into the movie. And some people felt like you didn't need it. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? You're connecting 3 movies that came out in the 80s. Of course, one came out in early 2000s. But we haven't seen this character in so long. Like, this is a great way to connect the dots. And everybody was like, oh, well, I could tell when he started moving. I was hook, line, sinker. You got me.
Yeah,
I loved it.
we've seen worse. I think it looks good overall. I think that scene looks great when he's in the train. He's like kind of going through the compartments, and he's taking the at that point it's not the dial, it's like a sword of some sort. And I love all those moments where he's like hiding with the other Nazis, and then he punches Mads Mikkelsen. All those moments are great. I think when he gets on top of the train, he's like running along, and he gets in that big fight. I think then we get into like a little sketchy territory.
That was a little more CG, too.
Yeah.
Like more CG heavy.
But overall, I think it's a necessary scene to really connect those dots, like you said. I mean, a lot of the Indiana Jones. I mean, Last Crusade starts with the flashback as well, but that's a much different flashback. But that's like my favorite part of the Last Crusade is that flashback. So I think the flashback is necessary to really set the stage of the dial of these characters. Even if Mads Mikkelsen gets hit in the head real hard, I think it's important that we know who he is. So.
That in that way they get into Marvel territory where somebody gets hit so hard they should be dead. But
yeah, that's how. I mean, my audience.
That's where I'll agree with you.
My audience was very like, "Whoa, is that it?"
That's it.
They were very
How does he
shocked.
come back to life?
Exactly. Well, they could have done something with like maybe resurrection, the dial. Who knows? But who knows?
See, we're all writers in our heads.
We are to an extent.
Rewriting. But no, overall, I like that sequence. I mean, I really did like all of the action set pieces. I think the Morocco stuff was my favorite just because the tuk-tuk, it felt very classically indie to me. And I liked the aesthetic and the movement of it and it just had a pace. The whole thing felt like I was like holding my breath. And it didn't feel like it went on too long. It felt super cohesive and super indie. And those are the moments that I liked personally the best. But yeah, I did enjoy the time travel. Would be a close second. So this is the moment I'm going to ask you to rank the original trilogy.
Okay, the original trilogy.
Yeah.
There is a right answer according to you.
Yeah.
So I'm a little nervous to do this right now, but here's what I'll throw out.
Okay.
And then, audience can judge me as you will, but I'm going to go Last Crusade, Raiders, and then Temple. That's how I would go.
Whoa!
Yeah. Now, I think it's important to note with a little asterisk, I love them all dearly.
Yeah.
I love them, to different capacities, but I love them all. I'm a big fan of Last Crusade. I think Last Crusade is maybe my favorite. So that's how I would do it.
Okay, so
what is yours? What is the right one?
the correct answer is Temple of Doom.
Wow.
Raiders, and then Last Crusade.
Literally the opposite of mine. Okay.
And here's the crazier part that I'm going to throw into this equation. My favorite franchise of all time is Bond, and my favorite Bond of all time is Connery.
Okay.
So why is it my number 3?
I don't know. I
don't know. For me, they were all great. That's the thing. Like, how do you choose between your children?
Exactly.
But I think that one for me, I wasn't 100%, and maybe it's because Connery was only 12 years older than Harrison Ford at the time. It didn't 100% feel like father-son all the time.
Interesting.
Maybe felt like uncle. But I think I just love Temple of Doom. I love the darkness of it. I love the opening sequence. Is my favorite opening sequence.
The musical is
time.
great. Yeah.
I loved all the characters in it. I loved the fact that you had this starlet kind of along for the ride that was sort of a fish out of water. And, and the obvious.
I think Temple of Doom is good. I think I like it. I don't know if it's aged the best out of all the other Indiana Jones movies, and that's maybe why it tends to be on a lot of people's lower half of the rankings. I will say, I love your ranking. I will say I think mine's a little more popular than yours. So
yours is definitely, but sometimes it's Raiders first.
Many times it's Raiders first, and I don't blame anybody who having Raiders first.
It's always hard.
It's Raiders of the Lost Ark.
It's always hard to beat the original of anything because it's the original, and everything is building off of that. So that's always hard. But yeah, I would. It's the opposite. Now, can you put this film into?
That's tough to say. Before this episode recorded, we were talking about, can you compare Dial of Destiny to the original 3? Maybe you can compare it to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but how do you compare a movie from 2023 from a movie in the 80s? It's really tough to do. We're talking not just character-wise, but we're talking technology and action. Everything is just much different now. So it's hard to compare this to the original. And I think maybe a part of what problems or issues people might have with Dial of Destiny is that it does sometimes feel like they're attempting to capture this like Spielbergian charm that the original three had. When is that even possible? Is it even possible to make a movie like that has that charm from the original three? Arguably, it's not. And so sometimes it feels like it's trying to be like that classic Indiana Jones, but it's just we're living in a different time now. I don't know if we can ever recapture that magic. So it's hard to say. What do you think? Can you?
I don't think I can at this point.
Yeah.
And we did talk about this. So it was an unfair question that I asked you because I think, yeah, okay, so the last film, maybe the fourth, you could compare a little bit, which I didn't mind that film because I think I was just getting into this business when that film came out. So I think it was one of the first screenings I ever went to. And, Shia was like a hot actor at the time, right? Like, and I thought he was like a perfect choice as his son at the time. Maybe that one for me hasn't aged as well, but at the time I was delighted, and it was also so much anticipation around like the first film from the original trilogy, so just great to have him back. And then this one, he is at such a different place in his life. So I just think it's so hard. You're talking about films that we sat with for 40 years or 30 or however old you were when you saw the first ones versus a film that we just saw a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And this is clearly something like when I look at Mangold's filmography, one thing that I did say to Harrison when I talked to him, I was like, the thing I love about James Mangold as a director, if you watch a Tarantino movie, you know it's a Tarantino movie. If you watch a Wes Anderson movie, you know it's a Wes Anderson movie without even knowing the director. James Mangold is so varied as a director. He's given us so many different genres and styles, but it wasn't until I started thinking about this movie, I started thinking, the one thing that he does, I could say is a bit of a through line in some of his films, is that sort of man that's later in life, downtrodden, down on his luck, Walk the Line, Logan, Ford v. Ferrari, although that was to a certain degree, it wasn't the classic young upstart hero.
Yeah.
It was a guy that's sort of been passed over. And so that's sort of the common thread. And I know Harrison and James are very good friends. And I'm picturing the conversations they were having about this film as James was rewriting the original script and as they were discussing. And I think the one thing that kept coming back to them is Harrison was like, we need to have a reason to have this movie. It can't just be a movie for movie's sake. And so I could just picture Harrison reading that script. Oh, yeah, this is some great character stuff here. Like, I'm down on my luck. I'm this, I'm that. So in that sense, I really appreciate that there was another level to Indy that we didn't see before.
Yeah, I agree.
So to circle back to the original question, which is why I can't compare, it's a different person 40 years later.
It is.
And people who are going to say, well, Top Gun Maverick came back and did a movie 35 years later. That one's set in present day. That one brought in a whole new generation of actors to appeal to a younger generation. This one, to me, felt very classically indie. And when you say Spielbergian, I agree. But if it didn't, where would we be as a film if we didn't have that element,
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, I think it's interesting that Crystal Skull, I think, is going through a little bit of a reclamation right now. I think a lot of people are going back to it and saying it maybe isn't as bad as we thought initially. And maybe that's because it's been over 10 years since we got it. And maybe in 10 years we'll look at Dial of Destiny and say, yeah, that was something that was necessary for the conclusion of Indiana Jones. It is maybe a little too early to say like where it sits in the franchise because it is so drastically different from the originals. It's almost unfair to compare them. Yeah,
and I think the thing to glean from this too is I guess it sort of shows you what side I'm on when I started seeing the audience score come in over the weekend and it was like 88%. And I was like, my heart is full. I'm so happy that people are enjoying this movie.
Yeah, I think it's hard not to, I mean, even someone like me who may not have loved this movie because I also had really high expectations. I love Mangold and I love Indiana Jones. But even somebody who didn't maybe love this movie, I still really enjoyed it. I still had a great time watching it. It was fun to watch all the kind of adventure romps again and go through these moments. We didn't even talk about all the puzzle solving scenes, which I think are my favorite moments. When Helena's on the boat and she's reading off the translation and kind of going through them like students. Love that scene. Big fan of that moment. Or when they're in Italy, I think they're going through the cave and they're doing classic puzzle solving scenes. It really felt like nostalgic indie, and that's just some of the best moments in the movie for me.
Yeah, and I think those are things that are going to age well too. Like
yeah,
what
I
you're
agree.
saying,
Yeah.
and you actually answered my question because that was my next question was like your favorite elements of some of your favorite elements of the film. And yeah, when you think about like when I think about Mission Impossible as a franchise, the thing that I love about that is the twists. Like you always have these cool twists. This one, it is the puzzle solving element of it, and nobody delivers a one-liner like Indiana Jones.
No,
like he's just all of that. Doesn't matter how old you are. That irreverent, don't take yourself too seriously, charm, every grin is earned. You know, it's just, it was still all there.
Yeah, it was. And like you said, we talked about the plot twist a few times about the time travel thing. And we're going to talk about how if it was too ridiculous, will audiences think it's too ridiculous? I will argue back and forth that it's not too ridiculous. Indiana Jones has always been a franchise of some ridiculous things. The first movie, people's faces melt off. The second movie, there's voodoo and witchcraft. And the third movie, there's a holy grail. And the fourth movie, they met aliens. I mean, literal aliens and UFOs. I don't think it's too ridiculous for a movie like Indiana Jones to go in time travel. I love that they committed to that. And I think that's something that will age really well in the future. It's like they committed, they went for it. I almost wish they spent more time in ancient Sicily, if I'm being honest.
I agree. I think that could have been a longer sequence.
Yeah, I think it could have been fun.
They could have interacted because they were always at a distance.
Correct,
right?
yeah. Interacting with the people there, interacting with Archimedes a lot more.
Yeah.
I think there's more there that could have been explored, and I would have been happy to spend the last maybe 30, 45 minutes there instead. But
instead of the train.
Yeah, figure out how to get out and that type of thing.
Yeah.
That could have been pretty fun. So
ooh, that would have been really fun.
We're all writers in our head, like you said.
Yeah, that you're right. That could have been it could have been longer. It feels like it was a button.
Yeah.
When it could have been a little bit. But no, I don't think it was ridiculous at all because it's in the trailer. And I don't even know if it was in the final cut, but it was in the trailer where Harrison says, I don't know if I don't believe in magic, but I've seen some things.
Yes. Yeah.
And he definitely saw the thing. And that is actually, I think, my favorite moment in the film is seeing his joy watching history unfold in front of him.
Yeah, I agree. That moment still, like, I think the only part I don't like about that moment in the time travel sequence is this slightly underwhelming death scene of Mads Mikkelsen's character. I thought I wanted something a little bit more exciting, a little bit more rewarding, but I mean, he gets his comeuppance by crashing in a plane. But other than that, I mean, I love that before that moment, you see that sarcophagus with like the dragon on it, and they're like, this dragon has propellers on it. And it's like leading up to this moment that you don't think could happen. And then even leading up to the time travel part where they're on the plane and Harrison's like, continental drift, you're going to get it wrong. And there's that moment, it's like, are they going to get it wrong? Just some really great tension building. And when they do finally commit to it, I love it. Big fan.
Yeah. Harrison overall doing his best work. He's shrinking. He'll probably be nominated for an Emmy.
This is true.
I don't know when this is airing, but he's very possibly going to get nominated for an Emmy. So did you think this was better than Crystal Skull, in your opinion, if we're going to go there?
If we're going to go there, I did rewatch Crystal Skull recently kind of to prepare for rewatching this movie. And I think there's some things it's doing that's a lot of fun. Like you said, at the time, Shia for Mutt Williams was like the perfect choice. And I think they play into that role really well. There are some things that are interesting choices story-wise. I mean, the meeting of the aliens is definitely out there, and it's definitely interesting. But, you know, looking back at it now, it's kind of fun. The CGI back then, I think, was panned a lot. I'm looking at it now, I'm like, it's not that bad. It is what it was at that time. I don't know. I'm kind of at a toss-up right now. I think I liked Dial of Destiny slightly more than Crystal Skull, but I also don't think Crystal Skull is bad by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I like I said, I liked it too, but I would still say this one's better. Yeah. Because I think it feels more in alignment with the original. Yeah, tonally with the original.
I can agree with that.
And sticking to that, like I said, classic. Let's revere our heroes of film instead of bashing them and telling them what they should have done better in 2023.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, speaking of which, the box office.
Okay.
60 million, not amazing. Thoughts on why it was 60 and yeah.
This is a tough question to unpack because, you know, what goes into this box office, like who's seeing this movie? I guess it's like kind of the foundation question. Who is going to see Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny? So you have your diehard fans of Indiana Jones, you and I, people who grew up with the movies, families who grew up with it. They're going to go see this movie regardless of who says what. They're going to go see it. But we're now in a point. We're in 2023. Gen Z is grown up. They're buying tickets. And if they're not growing up with Indiana Jones, what motivation do they have to go see Indiana Jones at this point? What is the draw? If they never grew up watching Raiders or Last Crusade or Temple, what is pushing them to go see this movie? I mean, if people aren't going to go see Marvel movies as much, what's going to be different about Dial of Destiny is kind of the question at hand. And I don't know how to answer that. Like, at this point, you just have to make a movie that's going to blow somebody away, but I'm not sure if there's anything like the action sequences may be fun, but there's nothing in there that they haven't seen in a Fast and Furious movie. They haven't seen in the MCU movie. Harrison Ford, bless his soul, but he's not going to be doing his own stunts like Tom Cruise. So if that's not the appeal, then what's going to be the appeal? And I think that's the question that is hard to answer. What do you think?
I think it's a lot of things. I think it's a very crowded movie season. I think that is the biggest reason, personally. I think aside from, because like some people were saying, oh, it's because the review at a Cannes. I'm like, most people in America
don't care.
Don't even pay attention to Cannes or even notice or even think about or even see a score or read reviews. They maybe in the news hear something about, oh, they had a premiere. And that's the gist of it. I think we are in a summer movie season, which is great for us as audience members, where every single weekend you have a blockbuster film opening. You have, in the case of Barbenheimer, two movies opening in the same weekend. And that just sort of shows you the landscape that neither one of them, that they're going to keep it that way. And some of it's due to the buildup from the pandemic and things getting delayed. But we are spoiled for choice and we still have stuff at home we can watch. And so I think it's really hard for any movie to break through and become I don't think you can have record-breaking numbers every single weekend. And I think that is a huge part of it. I think people, and I just know because I'm from a small town and I know how my family and friends decide to go to the movies. And they'll see a couple movies a summer and maybe it just wasn't like on their radar as like, oh, this is priority for me. So I think it's one of those that's going to play well. I hate to say this later on, but when it comes out on streaming, I think it's one of those that everybody's going to want to watch if they didn't catch it in theaters. But I agree with you. I think the demo was 42% people over 45 and mostly male, or a higher percentage of male-female split than normal. And so it was a nostalgia play for a lot of people. And like you and I are movie aficionados. We love the franchise. But you're right. Like I would ask, and I always reference my nephew on the show, but when sometimes I judge the zeitgeist by what he says.
Yeah.
And if I'm like, are you excited to see Indiana Jones? And he hasn't seen the original trilogy, even though he's a movie fan. So, yeah, I think maybe it was sort of dialing into that sort of younger demo that they're super motivated to go and see it several times.
Yeah. My only counterpoint to what you said is that while there is a plethora of options to go see, in June, I mean, 3 movies alone have been flopping. So if people aren't going to go see the movies before Indiana Jones, at that point, it's like not a question of like choices. It's just, why aren't people seeing Indiana Jones? Clearly, no one's seeing Elemental and no one's seeing The Flash. No one's watching anything in June except for Spider-Man, which came out the first week of June. So it's interesting because there are choices, but people aren't choosing those movies either. Yeah,
but that's sort of, I think we're saying the same thing because, there's certain people I know will be like, oh, I'm definitely going to go see Mission. I'm definitely going to go see Barbie. And it's not that they didn't want to see Indiana Jones. It's that they have their priorities maybe, and maybe that wasn't a priority.
Yeah.
Because it didn't have, it had more of a nostalgia feel. So it's like, are you racing to the theater to see something nostalgic? Or are you racing to see something that you've never seen before?
Exactly,
It's just like people do pick and choose. So I do think it's hard to have, in a summer of 2023 or whatever summer it is, aside from the pandemic, 7 or 8 record-breaking movies.
You make another good point in terms of the streaming. And I think a lot of people have brought this up to me as a potential reason why people aren't going to the movies. One, the movies are still expensive. It's an expensive outing for a family of 4 to go see a movie. 2, what is the motivation to go see a movie, especially a Disney movie, when you know it may be on Disney Plus in 3 to 4 months?
But that's the case for everything.
To some extent, everything. But for sure, Disney, they have a dedicated a dedicated streaming service,
Yeah.
streaming platform, you know that Quantumania will be on streaming in 3 to 4 months. You know it's going to be that place. Netflix and Max and all these other places, you may not know if they're going to go there. Maybe at some point in a year, maybe 6 to 8 months, but you don't know for sure because it's not made by Max or Netflix. So it's hard to say, but like I know some people will say to me, if the initial reaction to Quantumania aren't very good, why would I go watch it when I can just watch it on Disney Plus in 4 months? So it's like, well, that is a good point. Like I can't argue against that. So I'm wondering if this movie does go Disney Plus at some point, because it will. What will be the amount of people streaming it versus the first time they watch it versus the second time they watch it? That'll be really interesting to see.
And it's nice to know that the people who have seen it are really liking it, that the score is so high. And I think it is going to be one of those where people are going to be like, oh my gosh, it was so good. I wish I saw it in theaters. It would have been so fun.
It will be one of those things. I think it will.
Because I think it is one of those films that, I was completely like transformed into like a little girl watching some of those classic things and like the excitement level around watching that character. But again, it's like sometimes when people prioritize certain movies, it's because the newsiness of it, right? Like a Marvel film. Okay, well, I got to find out what's going to happen in Infinity War, or Endgame, or this. Like, I got to go see it opening weekend, or or there's a buzz. There's like a buzz you feel in the air about certain films that they just have this momentum. And this one, unfortunately, I was hoping.
Oh, I was hoping.
I was hoping so much, but I am thrilled that people who are seeing it are loving it to sort of offset that initial. Where do you think the franchise goes from here?
That's a good question. I don't think it goes away. That's my short answer. It's not going away. Maybe take a break for 5 years or so, take that moment to kind of recalibrate and figure out where they want to go. Does Phoebe Waller-Bridge don the hat, the fedora, and the whip and become the new, Indiana Jones? Possibly. I would be more than okay with that. You and I were talking before that there is this, big fan casting wish to have Ke Huy Quan kind of to shift the focus from Indiana Jones. Let's not go to Ke Huy Quan and focus on his character, which is, I think, not a terrible idea. I mean, he's a beloved actor. He's a beloved character in the franchise. It's a good way to keep it within the Indiana franchise, but focus on something different. I don't know where it goes. I do think we need a little break, maybe 5 more years, and we'll resume. Do we do a TV show? Do we try to do a Disney Plus thing? I don't know. Do we cast a different person? I have no idea. What do you want to do? What do you want to see?
I have one person. People can hate me for this. Chris Pratt.
Chris Pratt, that was a rumor for a long time that people thought was going to happen.
And initially I was like, no, he's done so many franchises, but freaking Guardians 3, I'm sorry, he was so damn good, and he reminded me of why he is a movie star. He has the same essence, I think, of an Indiana Jones. Like when I picture people putting on the hat, I'm not even saying he has to put on the hat, but in continuing the adventure in some way. That's where I don't know how they would do it because he was never established.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's a reboot of a franchise with a younger, because then I think you would even go younger and cast somebody in their 20s. But he seems to be the obvious choice in terms of somebody who I could picture pulling off the humor, the action, being overall just likable. He, to me, works. For some reason, I feel like a TV series works, although I don't know if he needs to do it. Like, not needs to, but I don't know if you would get Pratt to do a TV series. Or maybe if you do a series, you do reboot it and choose somebody younger. Or would have been cool if Short Round was established in this movie in some sense. So he's not Indiana, but you pick up the adventure from his perspective and you go on a whole new adventure with this character that you know and love. And we know he can pull off, like, he makes you feel, he makes you laugh, he makes you cry. He's wonderfully lovable, and you do take it in a different direction. So there's lots of places to go. I don't think it has to go away, but I actually, and you're going to think I'm even crazier, but when the movie ended, I was like, I think Harrison's got one more in him.
Oh, wow, one more?
I think he's got one more.
Maybe him and Marion could do a one more, I guess. I don't know if we'll get it.
I don't know. I don't think we're going to get it.
Yeah, Chris Pratt might be booked and busy. I mean, we had now Mario, and I think he's going to be in Garfield now. So, I mean, if that takes off, there's another franchise that will likely want to use him more. So we'll see with that. I don't know. I don't think the franchise ends. I don't think they're going to get rid of this property.
I don't think they need to.
They don't need to. Yeah.
It's been so long, and so why not continue it in a new and fresh and different way? But again, like, it would have to be justified. But at the same time, like, Chris Pratt does love Disney. He has a great relationship with Disney and Marvel. And Chris Pratt loves to work. And I appreciate that about him. He's not like, oh, no, I don't want to do this or I don't want to do that.
It's not impossible.
And
it's not impossible.
People doubted him. Like about a year ago, there was all this sort of backlash against Chris Pratt. And I'm like, he nailed Mario, Guardians, like his box office totals for somebody's got a total. Rotten Tomatoes total his box office for the past year because he's crushing it.
Oh, I mean, it's up over $2 billion probably.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Mario itself made $1 billion. So that's not a bad choice in the sense of trying to reestablish a franchise and try to bring audiences in at all. But the question I think really at the hand is, when are they going to do it? At what point? And then, like you said, there's so many logistics to it. Where do we start?
Yes.
Do we do a reboot? Is it a different story? Is it just like where do we begin again?
Yeah,
is the real question. I think that this is a question they're going to be asking for a lot of their franchises. So Star Wars ended. Now they're like, okay, are we doing a sequel? It looks like they are going to do a sequel. But this is kind of the question they're asking all these franchises that are quote unquote ending, but then they want to continue on. So it's hard to say.
That just opened a whole can of worms, and that's probably a good place to end this then. That
works for me.
Another episode.
That works for me.
Joe, this was a delight. It was great chatting with you.
Thank you
had
for
so many
having me on.
refreshing ideas and thoughts and changed my mind about a few things.
Oh, great.
So thank you for joining and let everybody know where they can find you.
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, if I change your mind on anything, it's to revisit Last Crusade one more time and give it a second chance because I think it's very good. But you can find me on TikTok, Instagram at Cinema Joe. That's where I post most of my reviews and discussions and rankings. My own podcast, House of Cinema Podcast. We talk about movies and that's about it.
And you're a delight. You're a delight to chat with.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Appreciate
you
that.
again, Kieran, for joining.
Oh, yes, Kieran. Kieran, if you're listening to this, you want to do a podcast together. All of us together in one room.
Are you in for Succession, for a new season of Succession? Because then maybe we could,
Maybe if it's like a Roman-esque, like centered story, that works for me. Sure.
You're his long lost brother.
There we go. Roman had a brother.
From
It's
another
me.
mother. Thank you all for watching. My great wish is that you see Dial of Destiny in the theaters where it's meant to be seen.
I agree.
But I guess if you're here, you've already seen it. Well, maybe just go see it again. But thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the After Show, and we will see you on the next one. Bye.